You can tell everything about a man by the way he walks into a room when everyone's already laughing at him. The first body hit the mat before anyone realized the tryout had actually started. A 6'4" former heavyweight fighter stumbled backward across the polished training floor, catching himself on one knee while an entire room of executives, security contractors, and recruiters stared in stunned silence. No one understood what they had just seen. Not even Claire Whitmore. The CEO of Whitmore Dynamics stood behind the glass railing above the sparring area, one hand resting lightly against the steel banister as the fluorescent lights reflected off the marble walls behind her. Her security division had trained federal teams, protected diplomats, even handled overseas contracts worth millions of dollars. She had seen world-class operators before. But the quiet single dad in the faded brown jacket standing calmly in the center of her training floor did not look like one of them. 6 hours earlier, Ethan Cole had walked through the front lobby carrying nothing except a folded resume and an old duffel bag slung over one shoulder. Rainwater dripped from the edge of his jacket onto the black tile beneath his boots. The receptionist barely looked up. "Maintenance entrance is around back," she said automatically. A few men waiting for interviews chuckled quietly without lifting their eyes from their phones. Ethan simply nodded once. "I'm here for the executive protection tryout." That earned louder laughter. One applicant, broad-shouldered with a tactical polo stretched tight across his chest, leaned back in his chair and smirked. "You serious?" Ethan glanced toward him calmly. "Last time I checked." The man shook his head slowly. "Buddy, this isn't mall security." Ethan said nothing after that. He just walked to the far corner of the waiting room and sat alone beneath the hum of fluorescent lights while rain streaked down the giant lobby windows behind him. Most of the applicants talked too loudly. Former SWAT. Private military. Combat sports champions. Men who carried confidence like a performance. Ethan kept his eyes lowered, thumbs moving slowly across his phone screen. Claire noticed him from the second-floor balcony while reviewing candidate files with her head of security. "Who's the guy in the brown jacket?" she asked. Her security director glanced down and scoffed lightly. "Probably confused." But Claire kept looking. Something about him felt wrong. Not weak. Not nervous. Just, still. Like someone who had already survived things no one else in that room could imagine. A moment later Ethan's phone buzzed softly. His expression changed instantly. Softer. Warmer. He answered quietly. "Hey, Peanut." A little girl's voice crackled through the speaker faintly enough that no one else could hear clearly. Ethan smiled for the first time all morning. "Yeah, Daddy remembered your recital tonight." He listened for a moment, then glanced at the old watch on his wrist. "I'll make it home in time. Promise." Claire looked away before she understood why that sentence bothered her. Maybe because most men in rooms like this talked about power. But the tired single father downstairs sounded like a man afraid of disappointing one little girl more than he feared failing the interview. The waiting area outside Whitmore Dynamics' private training floor smelled faintly of coffee, leather, and rain drying on expensive coats. Security candidates filled the long steel benches beneath the wall monitors, each one carrying themselves like they had something to prove. Some stretched their shoulders. Others compared contracts and deployment stories loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Ethan Cole remained silent in the corner, one boot crossed loosely over the other, his weathered duffel resting beside him on the floor. The old brown jacket still clung damply to his shoulders, though the rain outside had stopped nearly an hour ago. "You really going through with this?" the large applicant from earlier asked while tightening the straps on his gloves. His name badge read Marcus Kane. Former heavyweight champion. Former private contractor. The kind of man built to intimidate before he even opened his mouth. Ethan looked up calmly. "I came all this way." Marcus chuckled and exchanged a glance with two other candidates nearby. "You know what? This job pays." Ethan nodded once. Enough. The answer made them laugh again. One man muttered, "Guy probably thinks this is an armed chauffeur gig." Ethan did not react. He simply lowered his eyes toward his phone again while the overhead speakers crackled softly with announcements from another floor. Claire Whitmore watched everything from behind the tinted observation glass above the lobby corridor. Her assistant stood beside her holding a digital tablet filled with candidate profiles. "Marcus Kane is still your strongest option," the assistant said quietly. "Former combat sports, tactical experience, executive escort certifications." Claire barely listened. Her eyes remained fixed on Ethan downstairs. "What about him?" she asked. The assistant frowned slightly while scrolling. "Ethan Cole. 42. Former military. That is all. That is literally all." Claire crossed her arms slowly. "No recommendations? None. No social media? No online footprint at all?" That finally caught her attention. In her world, everyone left traces somewhere. Photos. Interviews. Bankruptcies. Divorces. Ethan Cole existed like a shadow. The observation room fell quiet except for the low hum of ventilation fans overhead. Down below, another candidate sat beside Ethan with an amused grin. "So what was your military job, old man? Cafeteria duty?" Ethan slid his phone carefully back into his pocket. "Training." "Training what?" Ethan met his eyes evenly. "People." The candidate smirked. "You are real mysterious, huh?" Ethan shrugged faintly. "Not really." Before the man could respond, the training room doors opened with a mechanical hiss. Staff members entered carrying clipboards while several security recruits immediately stood straighter. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Less joking. More tension. One instructor stepped forward, tall and broad with silver hair cut close against his scalp. "Welcome to Whitmore Executive Protection Evaluations," he announced. "This is not a gym competition. This is not social media nonsense. We are selecting professionals capable of protecting high-value lives under pressure." His eyes swept across the room. They paused briefly on Ethan. "Some of you are here because of your resumes. Some because of your reputations. By tonight, none of that matters." Marcus rolled his shoulders confidently beside the others. Ethan remained seated until the last possible second before standing slowly and lifting his duffel bag. Claire noticed the movement immediately. No wasted energy. No nervousness. No performance. Just control. Then one of the younger recruits whispered loudly enough for the room to hear, "If Grandpa survives warm-ups, I will buy everybody steaks." Laughter echoed sharply across the polished walls. Ethan adjusted the strap on his duffel and walked past them without a word. But as he crossed the training floor beneath the cold white lights, the older instructor watched him differently than the others. Not amused. Not dismissive. Concerned. Like he recognized something everyone else had completely missed. The training floor inside Whitmore Dynamics stretched nearly half the length of a football field, lined with dark padded walls and polished gray mats beneath rows of cold fluorescent lights. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked downtown Chicago 30 stories below, where rain still clung to the glass like streaks of silver under the afternoon sky. Candidates moved through warm-up drills while instructors circled silently with clipboards in hand. Some recruits stretched aggressively, bouncing on their feet like fighters before a televised match. Others rehearsed tactical movements in front of the mirrored wall, checking posture, speed, presentation. Ethan Cole did none of that. He stood alone near the back corner adjusting the cuffs of his sleeves with slow, deliberate movements. The older instructor from earlier watched him from across the room. "You served long?" he asked quietly while passing nearby. Ethan glanced up once. "Long enough. Army? Something like that." The instructor studied him for another second before nodding faintly and continuing on. Claire Whitmore stepped onto the elevated observation platform above the floor with a fresh cup of coffee warming her hands. Her sharp gray suit matched the storm clouds hanging outside the windows. Beside her, several board members leaned casually against the railing, clearly more entertained than invested. One executive laughed softly while pointing toward Marcus Kane. "That is your guy right there. Looks like he could stop a truck with his bare hands." Another replied, "Yeah, but the old man downstairs looks like he wandered in looking for the janitor closet." More quiet laughter followed. Claire did not join them. Her eyes remained fixed on Ethan. There was something strange about the way he occupied space. Most people entered rooms trying to project confidence. Ethan seemed completely uninterested in being noticed at all. One instructor clapped his hands sharply from center floor. "Partner drills. Controlled contact only." The room shifted instantly into motion. Boots squeaked against the mats. Men rotated into pairs. Marcus Kane quickly dominated every exercise he touched, moving with the confidence of someone used to crowds watching him. Every throw. Every takedown setup. Every movement carried performance inside it. Several candidates stopped to watch him between drills. Marcus noticed. He smiled wider because of it. Ethan remained without a partner near the edge of the room. One younger recruit glanced his direction, then looked away. Another shook his head quietly. Nobody wanted to risk looking weak against Marcus. Nobody wanted to look foolish paired with Ethan. Finally Marcus pointed across the mat with an amused grin. "I will take Grandpa." A few chuckles spread through the room immediately. Claire set her coffee down slowly. The instructors exchanged uncertain glances but said nothing. Marcus approached Ethan casually, rolling his neck as he walked. "Come on, old-timer," he said loudly enough for nearby candidates to hear. "Let us see if you remember any moves from the Cold War." Ethan zipped his duffel bag shut before standing. "This is just evaluation work, right?" Marcus smirked. "Scared?" Ethan shook his head once. "No. Just making sure." The room began gathering around the edge of the sparring mat almost instinctively. Phones appeared subtly in hands. Smiles widened. Even the board members upstairs leaned closer against the railing. Claire felt tension settle strangely in her chest. Not excitement. Not concern exactly. Something quieter. Like the atmosphere itself had shifted pressure without warning. Marcus stepped onto the mat first, stretching his shoulders dramatically while several recruits laughed behind him. Ethan followed a few seconds later. No swagger. No expression. Just calm footsteps beneath the bright white lights overhead. Then Marcus looked at him and grinned. "Try not to break a hip." Ethan met his eyes evenly for the first time all afternoon. And somehow that calm look made the older instructor beside the mat stop smiling completely. The entire training floor seemed to narrow around the sparring mat as candidates gathered closer along the edges. Some crossed their arms with amused grins. Others lifted phones chest high, pretending not to record. Above them, the executives on the observation platform leaned forward against the steel railing while rain tapped softly against the massive windows overlooking downtown Chicago. Marcus Kane bounced lightly on the balls of his feet, loose and confident beneath the bright white lights. "You can still back out," he said with a smirk. "Nobody here wants to watch a 40-year-old pull a hamstring." A few recruits laughed immediately. Ethan Cole stood across from him without changing expression. "I am 42, he said calmly. The answer drew another round of laughter. Marcus spread his hands dramatically toward the crowd. "Hear that? Ancient." Ethan slowly removed his old brown jacket and folded it neatly over the corner of a padded bench nearby. The room quieted slightly as the sleeves of his faded gray thermal shirt pulled tight across his forearms. Not bulky. Not flashy. but steady in a way that made the older instructor near the mat narrow his eyes. Ethan stepped forward onto the center line and looked toward the evaluation referee. "Controlled?" he asked. "Controlled," the referee confirmed quickly. Marcus grinned wider. "Do not worry. I will go easy." Ethan nodded once. "Appreciate it." The whistle sounded softly. Marcus circled first, shoulders loose, testing distance while the room watched with growing anticipation. He moved like a professional entertainer as much as a fighter, feeding off attention with every shift of posture. Ethan barely moved at all. His hands remained low. His breathing steady. Claire Whitmore noticed that immediately from the balcony above. No tension in his jaw. No adrenaline in his face. Just patience. Marcus made the first move with a quick forward step designed more to pressure than strike. Ethan shifted half a step sideways. Smooth. Minimal. Marcus blinked slightly before smiling again. "Okay," he muttered under his breath. The second approach came faster. Another feint. Another sudden advance. Ethan moved again with almost invisible efficiency, redirecting space instead of resisting it. The crowd's laughter faded little by little. Something about the exchange no longer felt funny. Marcus stopped smiling completely. "You trained before," he said quietly. Ethan answered without emotion. "A little." The room held still beneath the hum of fluorescent lights. Rain slid slowly down the windows behind the observation platform. Somewhere near the back wall, somebody lowered their phone. Marcus stepped forward a third time with sharper intent, trying to corner Ethan near the edge of the mat. Then everything changed in less than a breath. Ethan shifted once. One controlled movement. One precise redirection of momentum. Marcus lost balance instantly and dropped hard onto one knee before catching himself against the mat with both hands, shock spreading across his face faster than pain ever could have. Silence crashed across the entire room. No cheers. No laughter. No movement at all. Marcus looked up first, breathing heavier now, confusion burning behind his eyes. "How did you?" Ethan stepped back immediately, giving him space. "You leaned too hard on your front side," he said quietly. "Somebody should have corrected that years ago." Marcus stared at him speechless. On the balcony above, one executive whispered, "What the hell was that?" Claire did not answer. Her eyes remained locked on Ethan as he calmly extended a hand to help Marcus back to his feet. No pride. No mocking grin. No celebration. Just respect. And somehow that made the silence inside Whitmore Dynamics feel even heavier. For several long seconds. After Marcus Kane stood back up, nobody inside the training room spoke at all. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead while rain drifted against the giant windows surrounding Whitmore Dynamics like soft static across the city skyline. Marcus stared at Ethan Cole with a mixture of embarrassment and disbelief, still trying to understand how a man who looked exhausted from life had just redirected him so effortlessly in front of an entire room full of security professionals. Ethan simply stepped back toward the edge of the mat and reached for his folded jacket. "Good pressure," he said calmly. "Most people hesitate too much." Marcus blinked hard. He looked almost offended by the compliment. Around them, whispers slowly began spreading across the floor. "Did you see that? What even happened? No way, that guy is just former military." Claire Whitmore remained motionless above the room, one hand lightly gripping the steel railing in front of her. Beside her, the board members no longer looked entertained. They looked unsettled. Her head of security narrowed his eyes toward Ethan. "I want his file pulled again." "Already did," the assistant answered quietly. "There is almost nothing there." Claire turned sharply. "What does that mean?" The assistant hesitated before handing her the digital tablet. "No medals listed. No public records beyond a discharge date." No employment history for nearly 6 years after military separation. Claire scrolled silently through the nearly empty profile while the sounds of training resumed downstairs. One sentence finally caught her attention near the bottom of the page. Clearance access restricted by federal request. She frowned immediately. Restricted for what? There is no explanation attached. The assistant lowered his voice. I tried military databases too. Somebody buried him deep. Down below, Ethan sat alone near the back wall tightening the laces on his boots while other candidates resumed drills with noticeably less confidence than before. Nobody laughed near him anymore. Nobody made jokes about his age. Even Marcus stayed on the opposite side of the room, quieter now, humbled in a way cameras could never fully capture. The older instructor approached Ethan slowly carrying a clipboard tucked beneath one arm. You trained professionally, he said. Ethan kept his eyes lowered toward his boots. A long time ago. Special operations? Ethan looked up once. Does it matter? The instructor studied him carefully. Depends what kind. Ethan gave the faintest shake of his head. The kind people are happier not remembering. The older man went silent after that. Somewhere near the center mats, recruits shouted drill counts while padded gloves smacked softly against equipment. The room smelled faintly of sweat, coffee, and industrial floor cleaner warming beneath the lights. But around Ethan there remained a strange pocket of stillness. Claire noticed that too. She descended from the observation platform without warning, heels clicking sharply against the steel staircase as conversations throughout the room quieted around her. Most candidates immediately straightened posture when she crossed the training floor. Ethan did not. He continued adjusting the zipper on his duffel bag until her shadow stopped beside him. Mr. Cole, Claire said calmly. Ethan rose to his feet. Ma'am. Up close, she noticed details she had missed before. The faint scar near his jawline. The tiredness behind his eyes. The careful way he carried himself like someone permanently aware of every exit in the room. Claire crossed her arms lightly. You embarrassed one of the strongest applicants I have seen in years. Ethan shook his head. No, ma'am. He embarrassed himself by trying to impress people instead of paying attention. Several nearby recruits overheard that. None of them laughed. Claire held his gaze for another long second beneath the cold white lights overhead. Then she asked quietly, who exactly did you use to train? Ethan's expression barely changed at all. But for the first time since arriving, something colder moved behind his eyes. People your company has probably signed contracts with, he said softly. And somehow that answer disturbed Claire Whitmore more than if he had refused to answer at all. By early evening the storm outside had faded into a cold Chicago drizzle, leaving the windows of Whitmore Dynamics streaked silver beneath the city lights. Most of the candidates had already gone home after evaluations ended, their loud confidence slowly dissolving into exhausted silence as elevators carried them down toward the lobby. But Ethan Cole remained upstairs in the nearly empty training wing, seated alone on a narrow bench beside the lockers while carefully cleaning rainwater from his boots with a folded paper towel. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed softly, reflecting against the polished concrete floors. Somewhere deeper inside the building, janitorial carts rattled faintly through distant hallways. Ethan checked the old watch on his wrist again. 6:42. His daughter's recital started at 8. He exhaled slowly and reached for his phone. Daddy? The small voice through the speaker immediately softened the tiredness in his face. Hey, Peanut. Are you done being a bodyguard yet? Ethan smiled faintly. Almost. Did you win? He glanced toward the empty training mats nearby. I do not think it works like that. The little girl giggled softly through the phone. Mrs. Keller says if people clap for you, that means you win. Ethan lowered his eyes for a second. Then maybe I did okay. Claire Whitmore stopped walking when she heard his voice through the half-open hallway door. She had been heading toward the executive elevators with her tablet tucked beneath one arm when the quiet warmth in Ethan's tone made her pause without fully understanding why. She remained still outside the doorway while his daughter continued talking excitedly about her violin recital, school decorations, and a paper star she had made during art class. Ethan listened to every detail like none of it was small. Like every sentence mattered. "You promised you would not miss it this time," the little girl said softly after a moment. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. "I know. Are you going to keep your promise?" His voice dropped almost to a whisper. "Yes. I am." Claire looked away instinctively at that. Something tightened unexpectedly inside her chest. She had spent most of her adult life surrounded by powerful men who talked endlessly about sacrifice, ambition, leadership. But standing outside that doorway, listening to a tired single father reassure his daughter after a 12-hour day, she realized how rarely she had heard genuine gentleness from anyone. Ethan ended the call with a quiet smile before slipping the phone carefully back into his jacket pocket. When he looked up again, Claire was standing in the doorway watching him. Neither spoke for a second. Rain tapped softly against the darkened windows behind them. "You have a daughter," Claire finally said. Ethan nodded once. "Lucy. She is 11. Claire stepped farther into the room, heels clicking softly across the concrete floor. "You did not mention family during evaluations." Ethan shrugged lightly. This job was about protection work, not personal history. Claire crossed her arms slowly. Most candidates spent half the day talking about themselves. Most candidates wanted attention. The answer came calm and immediate. Claire studied him carefully beneath the pale locker room lights. Up close, the exhaustion in his face seemed deeper now. Not weakness. Where? The kind carried by people who had spent years surviving quietly without asking anyone for help. "Why executive protection?" she asked. Ethan looked down briefly at his worn duffel bag. "Because little girls need braces. And violin lessons are expensive." Claire blinked once at the honesty of that answer. No dramatic story. No speech about patriotism or honor. Just a father trying to provide for his child. Ethan stood slowly and slipped his jacket back on. "I should go." Claire glanced toward the rain-dark windows overlooking the city skyline. "You still have one final evaluation tomorrow morning." Ethan adjusted the strap of his duffel over one shoulder. "Then I will be here." He started toward the hallway before Claire quietly asked, "Mr. Cole, what happened to your wife?" Ethan stopped walking instantly. For the first time all day, silence around him felt heavy instead of calm. He kept his back turned toward her for several long seconds before answering softly. "Cancer." Then he walked out into the dim hallway without another word, leaving Claire Whitmore standing alone beneath the cold fluorescent lights, suddenly unable to stop thinking about the man everyone had laughed at only hours earlier. The next morning, Whitmore dynamics felt different. The laughter was gone. Conversation stayed lower now, more careful, like the building itself had quietly adjusted around Ethan Cole overnight. Rain clouds still hung over Chicago, turning the massive windows along the executive tower pale gray beneath the early morning light. Employees hurried through the lobby carrying coffees and digital tablets while security teams rotated shifts near the elevators. But inside the private training wing, tension lingered heavier than before. Ethan arrived exactly at 7:30 wearing the same brown jacket, the same worn boots, and carrying the same faded duffel over one shoulder. The receptionist who had mistaken him for maintenance the day before stood up immediately when he entered. "Good morning, Mr. Cole." Ethan nodded politely. "Morning." No jokes this time. No smirks from the lobby guards. Even Marcus Kane, already stretching beside the training mats upstairs, avoided eye contact when Ethan walked past him. Claire Whitmore noticed that immediately from the observation platform above. Respect had entered the room quietly overnight. And somehow Ethan seemed completely unaware of it. The final evaluations began with tactical simulations across multiple floors of the building. Candidates rotated through escort scenarios, emergency extraction drills, and executive response tests while instructors monitored reaction times through overhead cameras. Some recruits performed aggressively, trying too hard to impress. Others froze under pressure once alarms started echoing through the hallways. Ethan remained calm through every scenario. Too calm. During one exercise, a fake protest crowd blocked an elevator corridor while actors shouted over each other in controlled chaos. Most candidates pushed forward forcefully, trying to overpower the situation. Ethan simply guided the executive actor sideways through a service hallway nobody else noticed. Efficient. Quiet. Minimal attention. The older instructor watched the monitor feed and muttered under his breath, "That is not training. That is experience." Claire folded her arms tightly. "How much experience?" Nobody answered. Near noon, the final simulation began on the executive gala floor 32 stories above the city. Crystal chandeliers glowed warmly above polished marble while catering staff moved between linen-covered tables preparing for a real investor event scheduled later that evening. Candidates were assigned protective positions throughout the ballroom as part of the evaluation. Ethan stood near the western entrance beside a tall arrangement of white orchids while the others scanned dramatically around the room pretending to anticipate threats. Marcus adjusted his earpiece and smirked toward another recruit. "This is the easy part." Ethan remained silent. His eyes moved slowly across the ballroom once. Then again. Claire noticed the change in his expression immediately from across the room. Subtle. But real. He stepped away from the orchid display and looked toward the catering entrance near the kitchen corridor. One server carrying a silver tray avoided eye contact with security completely. Another wore gloves despite the warm indoor temperature. Ethan's posture tightened almost invisibly. Claire walked toward him quietly. "Something wrong?" Ethan kept his eyes on the far hallway. "Maybe nothing." "That does not sound reassuring." He lowered his voice slightly. "Too many exits unsecured." Claire glanced around the ballroom. Everything appeared perfectly controlled. Investors laughed softly near the bar setup while staff adjusted floral centerpieces beneath golden light. Nothing looked dangerous. But Ethan had gone completely still again. The same stillness she remembered before Marcus hit the mat yesterday afternoon. "Mr. Cole." Ethan's eyes narrowed faintly toward the kitchen entrance. "Who approved outside catering staff?" Claire frowned. "Why?" Before Ethan could answer, one of the ballroom lights flickered once overhead. Then twice. The room paused instinctively. Several candidates immediately reached for radios while confused guests looked around uncertainly beneath the chandeliers. Marcus stepped toward the center floor with visible tension finally replacing his confidence. But Ethan did not move toward the crowd. He moved toward Claire. Fast. Calm. Controlled. "Stay behind me," he said quietly. Claire felt her heartbeat shift immediately at the tone in his voice. Not fear. Certainty. Then somewhere beyond the ballroom doors, deep inside the service corridor, a loud metallic crash echoed sharply through the floor. The metallic crash echoed again from deep inside the service corridor, sharper this time, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps against tile. Conversations inside the ballroom collapsed into nervous murmurs almost instantly. Investors turned toward the hallway with confused expressions while catering staff froze beside silver trays and champagne glasses beneath the warm chandelier light. Several candidates reacted exactly the way Ethan Cole expected them to. Too loud. Too fast. Radios crackled at once. Marcus Kane barked instructions before understanding the situation. One recruit rushed toward the corridor entrance without backup. Another started pulling startled guests toward the center of the ballroom instead of the exits. Chaos was beginning to form. Ethan stepped slightly in front of Claire Whitmore, his eyes locked toward the service hallway with frightening focus. "Move your guests away from the walls," he said quietly. Claire looked at him. "What is happening?" Ethan answered without hesitation. "Panic. That is usually worse than the threat itself." Then the ballroom lights flickered again. A catering cart suddenly rolled uncontrolled from the kitchen corridor and slammed sideways into a decorative table near the entrance, sending silverware crashing loudly across the marble floor. Several guests gasped. One woman screamed. And just like that, the room lost discipline. People began moving all at once. Marcus shouted for everyone to stay calm, but his voice drowned beneath the confusion spreading across the ballroom. Ethan moved differently. No wasted motion. No yelling. He crossed directly toward the nearest group of frightened guests and guided them firmly toward a secondary hallway with one hand raised calmly. "This way," he said evenly. "No running." Something about his tone cut through the noise immediately. People listened. Claire watched in stunned silence as Ethan redirected the room almost effortlessly while trained candidates continued tripping over each other trying to take control. Near the service corridor, one of the temporary catering workers suddenly shoved past a security rope line, moving fast toward the ballroom floor with his head lowered. Marcus reacted late. Ethan did not. He intercepted the man halfway across the marble aisle with one precise movement, redirecting his momentum cleanly into the wall beside the corridor without striking him. The man dropped immediately to his knees, dazed more by surprise than force. The entire exchange lasted barely a second. Guests nearby froze mid-step. Ethan crouched calmly and removed a stolen employee keycard clipped beneath the man's sleeve. "Not catering," he muttered quietly. Marcus stared at him wide-eyed. "How did you know?" Ethan stood slowly. "Shoes." Marcus blinked. "What?" "Kitchen staff do not wear tactical soles." Before Marcus could respond, another loud noise echoed from deeper inside the service hall. Ethan's posture changed instantly again. Colder now. Focused somewhere beyond normal attention. Claire felt it immediately from across the room. This was no longer an interview to him. Somewhere in the middle of the confusion, the older instructor approached Ethan carefully. "Who exactly were you in the military?" Ethan never looked away from the hallway. "Someone they do not put in commercials." Then he moved forward alone into the dim corridor beneath the emergency lights while everyone else remained frozen behind him. The service hallway smelled faintly of steam, industrial soap, and hot electrical wiring. Ethan advanced silently past overturned trays and scattered linens while the ballroom noise faded behind him. Claire followed several steps back before Marcus tried stopping her. "Ma'am, you should stay here." Claire shook her head sharply. "No. I want to see this." At the far end of the corridor, two frightened maintenance workers emerged from behind a storage cart. Ethan immediately lowered his voice. "Anybody hurt?" One man pointed shakily toward an open utility door. "Some guy tried forcing access downstairs." Security alarms spooked him and he ran. Ethan studied the partially open door for one long second. Then his shoulders relaxed slightly for the first time in minutes. "It is over," he said quietly. Claire stared at him beneath the dim emergency lighting. "How can you possibly know that?" Ethan glanced down the stairwell once. "Because real professionals leave fast when surprise disappears." Silence settled heavily around the corridor after that. The maintenance workers looked at Ethan like he was something they did not fully understand anymore. Marcus looked embarrassed. The instructors looked disturbed. But Claire Whitmore only stood there watching the quiet single father beneath the flickering lights, slowly realizing that the most dangerous man in her building had also been the calmest one in it. By the time security teams fully cleared the gala floor, the storm outside had finally broken apart over Chicago. City lights shimmered through the towering windows of Whitmore Dynamics like scattered gold across wet glass, while exhausted employees moved quietly through the ballroom collecting overturned chairs and abandoned drink trays. The panic had passed, but the atmosphere inside the building felt permanently altered somehow. Nobody spoke to Ethan Cole the same way anymore. Marcus Kane sat near the edge of the ballroom, loosening his gloves slowly, still replaying the evening in his head with visible disbelief. The younger recruits who had laughed the day before now avoided meeting Ethan's eyes altogether. Even the instructors kept glancing toward him with a strange mixture of curiosity and caution. Ethan himself looked completely untouched by the attention. He stood alone near the western windows, adjusting the zipper on his worn brown jacket while downtown traffic glowed 32 floors below. The old watch on his wrist read 7:23. Claire Whitmore approached him quietly, heels tapping softly against the marble floor beneath the fading chandelier light. She carried a black leather folder tucked beneath one arm. "Mr. Cole." Ethan turned slightly. "Ma'am." Claire stopped beside him and studied his reflection in the glass for a moment before speaking. "My security division spent 6 months designing emergency protocols for tonight's simulation." Ethan remained silent. Claire exhaled softly. "You corrected half of them in under 10 minutes. Ethan glanced down toward the city streets below. "Your people focused too much on force. And you focused on what?" His answer came immediately. "Keeping people calm enough to think." Claire nodded slowly, like the sentence carried more weight than he realized. For several seconds neither spoke. Somewhere across the ballroom, maintenance workers vacuumed broken glass while soft jazz still played faintly through the overhead speakers, as if the building itself had not fully realized the night was over. Claire finally opened the leather folder in her hands and extended a contract toward him. "Head of Executive Protection," she said quietly. "Full salary. Full benefits. Company vehicle. Signing bonus." Ethan looked at the paperwork without reaching for it. Claire continued carefully. "You would oversee all high-level security operations for Whitmore Dynamics." Ethan's expression barely changed. "That is generous." Claire almost smiled faintly. "It is necessary." Ethan took the contract politely, scanning the first page beneath the warm ballroom lights. Then he looked back at his watch. 7:27 now. Claire noticed immediately. "You are thinking about leaving." Ethan folded the contract closed carefully. "My daughter's recital starts at 8. Claire blinked once. "You are turning down a 6-figure position because of a middle school violin concert." Ethan met her eyes calmly. "No," he handed the folder back gently. "I am leaving because an 11-year-old girl waited a long time for her father to keep his promises." Silence settled softly between them after that. Not awkward. Not cold. Just honest. Claire looked at the man standing beside her beneath the fading chandelier glow and realized something that unsettled her more deeply than any threat assessment ever had. Ethan Cole was not dangerous because he could control a room. He was dangerous because power no longer impressed him. The elevator bell chimed quietly across the ballroom. Ethan adjusted the strap on his old duffel bag and gave a small respectful nod. "Thank you for the opportunity, ma'am." Claire watched him start toward the elevators. "Mr. Cole." He stopped and glanced back once. Claire held his gaze beneath the soft golden lights reflecting across the empty ballroom. "Will you come back tomorrow?" Ethan thought about it for a moment. Then the faintest smile touched the corner of his tired face. "Depends," he said quietly. "How good is your coffee?" Claire laughed softly before she could stop herself. It was the first genuine laugh anyone had heard from her all week. Ethan stepped into the elevator a second later and disappeared behind closing steel doors, carrying nothing except an old duffel bag, a worn jacket, and the quiet dignity that had silenced an entire room.